Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder how our brains actually make sense of the world around us? Like, how do we take in all the sights and sounds and turn them into a coherent experience? Well, a bunch of researchers have been trying to figure this out using fancy brain scanning technology. They asked a really big question: how does our brain build up a picture of the world? Think about watching a movie. You see moving objects, hear sounds, and your brain is constantly putting all of this together to understand the story, the emotions, and everything happening. Traditional brain studies often look at specific parts of the brain that light up when you see or hear something. But these researchers wanted to go deeper. They wanted to know what information is being represented in each tiny little bit of the brain. So they developed this framework called the Voxelwise Encoding Model framework. It sounds complicated, but what it really means is they're building computer models to describe what information is stored in the brain. Imagine you have a giant puzzle. Instead of just looking at where the pieces fit, they're trying to understand what picture each individual piece represents. To do this, they use fMRI, which is that big donut-shaped machine that measures brain activity. When you are in the scanner, they show you things like videos and track which parts of your brain are busy. The key idea is that they extract specific information from what you are seeing or doing. For instance, if you are watching a movie, they can pull out information about the visual motion happening on screen, or even the objects and actions described by words. These extracted pieces of information are called feature spaces. Think of them as categories of knowledge, like things that are moving, or animals, or people. Then they use clever math to see if a specific feature space, like visual motion, can predict what is happening in a particular tiny spot in the brain, called a voxel. If a feature space can predict brain activity in a voxel, it means that voxel is likely representing that specific type of information. This is a really powerful way to test ideas about how the brain works. It is like saying, does this specific type of information we pulled out of the movie help us understand what this tiny brain area is doing? They use a technique called regularized linear regression, which is basically a smart way to build these prediction models without getting fooled by random noise in the data. They split their data into training and testing sets to make sure their findings are real and not just a fluke. This is super important because it ensures their findings aren't just specific to one particular set of movie clips or one person's brain. It helps avoid something called overfitting, where a model works perfectly on the data it learned from but fails when shown new stuff. One of the coolest parts is that they do this for each person's brain individually. This means they can see the unique way each person's brain is wired up, which is way more detailed than just looking at group averages. It is like studying individual trees instead of just mapping out the whole forest. Let's dive a bit deeper into how they actually created these feature spaces. They weren't just guessing. So for their movie watching experiment, they could ask people to label what is happening in the movie clips: person, car, running. That's the human-derived part. Or they could use computer models that understand visual information, like how edges and textures form objects. This idea comes from how we think early parts of the brain process basic visual information, like motion. This motion energy model is like a recipe for how the visual system might detect movement. They also used features from fancy computer programs called deep neural networks, which are trained on tons of data to recognize images and language. It turns out that the way these computers learn to see or understand language can sometimes predict how our brains do it, which is pretty amazing. The real magic happens when they compare these different types of feature spaces. They ask, does the visual motion model predict more brain activity in a certain area, or does the object recognition model do a better job? They developed ways to see which feature space is the winner for a specific voxel. It's like assigning points for how well each feature space predicts what the brain is doing. And they found really interesting patterns. In the back of the brain, the areas dealing with basic vision, like processing edges and movement, were better predicted by those low-level visual features. But as they moved toward the front of the brain, areas that deal with more complex things like identifying objects and understanding their meaning started to be better predicted by those semantic or meaning-based features. This is huge. It shows that the brain has a kind of map where different areas are specialized for different types of information, from simple visual elements to complex meanings. They can literally map out what kind of information is processed, where they can even visualize this. Imagine a brain map where different colors represent different types of information being processed in specific regions. It's like seeing the brain's internal dictionary. For example, areas known to be involved in recognizing places in a scene were indeed found to represent information about locations and events. Now, what does this all mean for us? It gives us a much clearer picture of how our brains process information. Instead of just knowing that a certain area lights up, we can understand what that area is representing. This is crucial for understanding everything from how we learn to how we perceive the world. It also helps us understand disorders where these representations might be disrupted. This method is incredibly flexible, working with all sorts of experiments from simple setups to complex, real-world scenarios like watching movies or playing video games. It is more robust than older methods because it uses data science best practices like checking predictions on new data. Plus, by working with individual brains, it captures a lot more detail than just looking at averages. Of course, no study is perfect. One limitation is that it can be challenging to collect enough data for each person to get super detailed maps, especially if participants can't stay still for long periods in the scanner. This means that sometimes they have to rely on group data, which can lose some of that fine-grained individual detail. But even then, this method still provides much richer information than older approaches. So, what is my take on this research? It's a really exciting step forward in understanding the brain. The Voxelwise Encoding Model framework is like giving us a new, super-powered lens to look at how our brains process information. By moving beyond just what is active to what is being represented, we're getting closer to truly decoding the mind. The ability to test hypotheses with prediction accuracy on unseen data makes the findings much more trustworthy. Future research will likely build on this by creating even more sophisticated feature spaces, perhaps incorporating more complex cognitive processes or even bridging the gap between brain activity and actual behavior in real time. Imagine being able to predict what someone is thinking or feeling just by looking at their brain activity. This framework gets us closer to that. What do you guys think about this approach? Does it blow your mind as much as it does mine? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into brain science, please hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more awesome science breakdowns, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.